So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maurya Hanspal, and in this session, we're gonna discuss on the initial public offerings. In the previous session, we started our initial discussion on the topic of initial public offerings or the IPOs, and we tried to understand what exactly do we mean by an IPO of a company, and we understood that what do we mean exactly by an IPOs, because in the recent past or in the recent year of 2020, we witnessed more than 54 IPOs in the country. And a huge chunk of these IPOs were the loss making IT tech platforms, as we popularly call them. Then we also try to understand how can a loss making company be listed on the stock exchanges or on the bourses, and how the mechanism is different from a profit making company. And we understood that when a profit making company is getting listed on the stock exchange, it has to submit a draft red herring prospectus, right? And the red herring prospectus, it contains everything about the company except the number of shares and the price at which the shares are being issued. In the profit making company, the 50% of the allocation or the 50% of the book goes towards the qualified institutional buyers or the qualified institutional investors, as we popularly call them as the mutual fund companies or the top management firms. The remaining 35% goes to the retail individual investors who contribute in the market or who invest in the market of the amount of up to 2 lakh rupees. And the rest 15% goes towards the high net worth individual investors who invest in market for more than 2 lakh rupees. And that's the scenario for a profit making company. Then we also try to analyze how a loss making company can be listed if the company can satisfy the future projection in the eyes of the Security Exchange Board of India SEBI. So when a loss-making company is getting listed on the stock exchanges, 70% of the book is allocated towards the QIBs, and the remaining 30%. From the remaining 30%, 15% each is allocated towards the retail individual investors and high net worth individuals. And that is the difference when a profit-making company and a loss-making company gets listed on the stock exchanges. Then we also try to understand the different types of prospectus by which the company can issue their share. We talked about the draft red herring prospectus or simply the red herring prospectus, which is nothing but includes all the information about the company, from the future projections to the past performances to financial statements, income statements, balance sheet, cash flow statements, statement of equities, notes to accounts, CSR activities, ESG norms, auditors reports, management discussion and analysis report, except the number of shares the company is issuing and the price for that. So these things, they come in the market at a later point of time when you get to know that how much is being issued or how much is the issue price or how much shares are being floated in the market. Then we talked about the deemed prospectus, which was nothing but a prospectus like which was being deemed to be a prospectus. Like for example, if a company is issuing shares not from its own entity but from some other's entity, so that entity will issue a prospectus that would be deemed to be a prospectus. Then we talked about the shelf prospectus. If a company wants to come into the market 4 times in a year, or like come up with the new shares in the primary market 4 times in a year, and wants to avoid itself from the hassles of like filing the prospectus once again and taking the approval from the SEBI once again, which can further take a time period of 6 months to 1 year. So that we try to understand. So what basically happened in the case of a shelf prospectus, 4 issues, maximum 4 issues of shares by the same company on the primary market can be done within the same calendar year. And the fourth prospectus that we talked about was the abridged prospectus. The prospectus is a statement that is a file or a document or a PDF which can comprise of pages of more than 600 pages or 500 pages. So being more complicated to read because of the huge number of pages, an ideal investor or anyone in general who does not have time and want to know about the company and invest into that company will find it difficult to read all the 600 pages because he might have some other work also. No matter if he also knew that how to read that annual report of the company or the prospectus of a company, still that person might not have enough time for it. So in that case, the prospectus that comes into place is the abridged prospectus. Okay, we talked about this prospectus, we talked about the abridged prospectus. So what exactly is the abridged prospectus? An abridged prospectus is something that gives you a summary of the prospectus. It tells you if you're not able to read those 500 pages and 600 pages in a prospectus, you can go through this abridged prospectus, and this abridged prospectus will give you a summary of the whole prospectus. All those 500 pages, 550 pages, and 600 pages would be summarized into a small file or a small document in the form of 300 pages or 200 pages, or maybe even 30 to 50 pages. So that will enable an investor or anyone who is interested to know about the company or to invest into that company to know that whether to invest or not to invest. So the abridged prospectus is also called a summary prospectus. So ultimately, we talked about the four kinds of prospectus which a company can issue. A draft red herring prospectus, which is nothing but a transformation into a red herring prospectus. A deemed prospectus, abridged prospectus, and a shelf prospectus. And if you are opening a company or owning a company, the concept of these prospectus is very essential. Maybe the deemed prospectus, it might not be essential for a particular period of time, because not all the companies they list their shares or issue their shares from some other company. But a red herring prospectus or a draft red herring prospectus has to be filed with SEBI always. Always a company needs to have an abridged prospectus, because not everyone will be able to read the whole 500 pages, 600 pages, or even for a large company, the pages can be 1000 plus also. So ultimately, they need to have an abridged prospectus also. Also, if the company is planning to issue shares more than once in the market, it must also file a shelf prospectus, because ultimately the company might need some urgent cash. And at that period of time, the company cannot wait for SEBI or the Securities Exchange Board of India to approve the same, because ultimately it can be a costly process. There would be the reviewing process, there would be the transaction fees and document submission fees and verification, all that will be done. And that can take up to 1 year, from 6 months to 1 year, and even more than 1 year as well. So the company might need some urgent cash, and instead of wanting equity, the company might have to raise debt in that scenario. So debt is not always bad. Even debt is cheaper than equity, and a large number of companies go for debt as well. But it might happen that the company already has a large amount of debt. And ultimately, to balance the interest of both the stakeholders, that is the debt holders and the capital providers, not the capital providers, the debt holders and the equity providers, the interest of all these stakeholders has to be balanced out and managed out, right? So for these things, the company might have to take more equity and less of debt. In that case, the shelf prospectus can help you deal that and prevent you from the hassles and the procedures which these companies do. Okay. And all these things, when a prospectus is issued in the market and when the shares of the company get listed on the stock exchange for the first time, from where do they raise money? The money is raised from the primary market and not from the secondary market. The first time when the company offloads a share in the market or creates new shares in the market, by offloading, I mean the offer for sale. Because ultimately, the promoters of the company or maybe the venture capitalists, like for example, InfoEdge in Zomato, that offloaded the share of 9,375,000 crores in the market. So these people is called offloading, off selling, or offer for sale, right? So these things, first time the money will come to the public only, because ultimately through the application, it's an interaction between the investors and the company. But when the shares get started to get traded in the market, the company won't be involved. Just the buyers and investors would be involved. And one buyer would be selling the shares to the other buyer, and the other buyer would be buying the shares from the seller. And that's the case of a secondary market and not a primary market. So this difference you need to know always. In a primary market, the shares are being issued for the first time, maybe an IPO or a new fund offer or an uh, initial coin offer. But in case of a secondary market, the shares are bought and sold between the buyers and sellers. So that difference you need to have, and that you need to understand as well. Okay, so that's all for today. I'll see you in the next session.